Xbox Series S, it is back in the discussions. If you guys remember at the beginning of this generation, it was always something that people were wondering if it was going to be an issue. And was it going to make it harder for games to release on Xbox, specifically because of the S, if there was a parity clause where it had to have certain features to actually just release across the entire Xbox platform. And we've seen, I would say, two major examples here where there has been an issue, and for games that, not that they aren't going to be coming out unless Black Myth Wukong just completely doesn't come out anymore, but they have had to be delayed because of it seemingly is the Xbox Series S. You've had Baldur's Gate 3. The issue with that was the split screen. So they got rid of that clause, and then that seemed to work fine, and the game was able to run. Now you have Black Myth Wukong, which we don't actually know if it is the Series S. There's been no official confirmation. This is all just speculation amongst journalists and amongst the social medias out there. But you would assume it probably has to do something with the Xbox Series S or something else behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And that has faced the fact that Black Myth Wukong has not been able to release on Xbox, and that is going to be delayed, which is a bad thing for Xbox with a game that is as popular as Black Myth Wukong. We actually got this announcement that they have sold 10 million copies since the launch. Now, this is across all platforms, and of course, this is a huge game in China, which is something that people, when they show these numbers, don't really talk about. I don't know if it really matters to anybody out there, but there are so many games that come out that don't get the marketing push in a population as big as China. But this game got, just from what I've seen and read, tons of marketing in China. People were really shown this game, and it really sold well there, which has allowed them to reach this 10 million units or copies sold across the different platforms. And that's a huge feat for this company. It's also a Tencent backed company, something we've talked about earlier in this week, where Tencent is a major player that Xbox has to think about ways to compete with. And one of the ways I think they are doing that is by putting their games in more places where people in those regions could access and want to see and play the Xbox games. So that's a story for a different time, but that's just an interesting thing to talk about when it comes to Black Myth Wukong, the power of Tencent and the power of the sales of that game. But it brings us back here to the Xbox Series S. We're still trying to wonder, why wasn't this game released at launch? And especially when you look at the PlayStation 5 and issues the game is having on the PS5, you would think that there has to be something more here with Xbox, because they probably could have released it on the Xbox version, bad optimization like they did on the PS5, and it would be at the same issue. But we do have some more people speaking out against the Xbox Series S, and this comes via Del Walker here on Twitter. Now, again, this is just one person's opinion on this. As we have witnessed throughout this entire generation, there have been more positive cases of games running good on the Xbox Series S, optimized well, 60 frames per second modes, 120 frames per second modes with like first-person shooters with Call of Duty, for example. So I think it still favors the Series S as being a positive, because there's been a lot more good cases than bad. But here's just another person's opinion saying, I wish the Series S never existed, man. So annoying to optimize for that console. I expect we'll unfortunately see more games launch get skipped by Xbox in the future. And Del Walker here is a principal artist, as previously at Naughty Dog, Rocksteady Games, Respawn. I actually worked on the recent Suicide Squad, which, as we know, was just an abysmal failure commercially and everything, lost like $200 million. And maybe that plays into some of the frustration here. I don't know. It could be something. But he points out here that he wishes the Series S never existed because it was annoying to optimize for. So he's just he's a principal artist on the games that he has worked on. If you go back here, you can see kind of his works. Lead character artist, senior character artist, senior character outsourcing artist for these games here, principal character artist. So that's what he does on the games, and this is what he tweets out. And if we do go through some of the replies, it is kind of interesting. It is kind of interesting to see some of the replies and the responses to those replies, because I think some of them are good, but then I think some other ones make me believe, hey, maybe he's just kind of making some of this up. I don't know. But he says, this person says, Jedi Survivor, then he says, I wish people understood it's not about the game. It's just annoying to make high-end games with complex AI, VFX, advanced physics, multi-threading optimization, particle systems, dynamic memory demands, etc. Then chop all that out so it also plays the same on an Xbox S, then I mean, I would say that probably does make sense when you think about it. It's not just simply downscaling the game, but there's all these other things they do have to add in. Like you mentioned something about enemies on screen, and they would have to reduce that and all that stuff. So that would be something that would be hard to do with less power in the box itself. This person says you will forever be known as Suicide Squad developer from now on. He says, I'm okay with that. I think the artwork in the game is top tier. And someone specifically asks this, which is a head scratcher for me, the actual response he gives. But he says, how is optimizing for the Series S different from optimizing for low-end PCs? And his only response to this, which is a question everybody wants to know, if the Series S is so hard to optimize for, how come games come out for PCs that are low specs, some even less than the Xbox Series S, and they can run? And he says people with low-end PCs are more understanding when you have to make the game look like dirt to run it. You don't have those options with the Series S. But the question is, why don't they have those options? I mean, you look at these games come out, and there are games you compare the Series X version versus the Series S. They look far less. And the Series S is in no way marketed as a top-end premier machine compared to the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5. It is marketed as secondary, lower-end console just by the price itself. You're not walking into the store unless you know absolutely nothing about video games. And even at that point, you wouldn't really pay attention to all of the higher resolutions and frame rates. So it doesn't really matter. But most people who know anything about consoles, gaming, or anything, even just a bit, would walk into a store, see there's two models, and see that this significantly cheaper model is obviously not going to give them the same performance as the higher end model. So I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think if you are buying the Xbox Series S, it's probably for particular things, and you know it's not going to be something where you're getting the best fidelity or the highest frame rates. Some people may even just be buying it because of the fact there are first-person shooters that get up to 120 FPS, but they're not looking for the best fidelity on the box itself. So that one I don't fully understand the answer to. And again, that is one of the biggest questions that people have. How can some of these games run so okay, or just run on low-end PCs, but the Xbox Series S is such a harder issue? And the thing I would potentially think here is that has to do with the clauses that Xbox has when games are being released, and just having to get things more parity to the X itself. And then we have this person says, I don't think I've ever seen any positive sentiment at all from developers regarding the Series S, which is just not true, but he does say subjective. He says, I know, but it seems nothing but a hindrance to ensure things get neutered down to run on it with feature parity. And response here, and it's not about graphics. If a game has 40 enemies on screen on the Series X, you'll never get it to handle that much AI processing, all the stuff that we talked about in the previous tweet. And it says you're forced to make a game with only 18 enemies on screen or whatever. And then he says, I assume this also adversely affects PlayStation 5 and PC development too, since it might not bode too well to just say one platform is going to be worse off than another. So there's a need to make it so every other platform under development would end up with 18 enemies too. And then the response here, it says it affects every cross-gen game. PS5 exclusives are the only ones free from this handicap, which is, to me, it's like, okay, maybe that's the case when you're only developing something for one box, but it's a limited box that is not even anywhere near how much processing power and all stuff you could fit onto a high-end PC. So that's the whole thing with it being an issue, cross-gen games and developers being annoyed about that. It's like they have to be able to develop these games for more than one spec and more than one platform. It's just the way that the gaming industry goes. And most people don't complain about that. Most developers aren't out there in social media complaining about it. It is just part of the job, which is essentially what it is. It's a part of the job to be able to get these games out to as many people on different platforms. So that is an interesting one there. If it's only PlayStation exclusives that don't have this problem, I feel like if it was such a massive problem across the industry, we would have way more people out there complaining and way less games coming out, because there's so many games that are multi-platform. You also have to ask things like the handhelds. How are these games running on something like the Steam Deck or other lower end pieces of hardware where they get certified for these devices and they work at getting them to function on them? So that is the one thing that it's still, at the end of the day, doesn't really make sense in terms of the development. And if the Series S is as big as an issue as some of these developers make it seem to be, what's going to happen when the Nintendo Switch 2 comes out? Because you would assume with the amount of Switch owners out there, and there's going to be a decent uptake of the Switch 2. It's going to be people transferring over. There's going to be new buyers. Third parties are going to want to get in on that. Like, they're going to want to get their games on there, the current generation of games that are coming out for the X and the PlayStation 5 and the Series S. Is that going to have a major effect? Is that going to have even more of an effect of the Series S? We'll see what happens here, but there's obviously a difference between certain developers. I think that's pretty obvious. You can see that when games do come out. Some games are just optimized, no issues, nobody's complaining. Other games have issues and there are complaints online about it. But I'm gonna end the video there, guys. If you did enjoy this video, hit that thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments, and what you think about some of the discussion that happened here in this tweet. And if you are new here, hit the subscribe, check out my Spotify in the description, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.